What's going on, everybody? This is episode 118 of From the Grave podcast. I am Scott, your host. We had a really good episode today with a dope guest on. His name is George St. Peterson. George St. Peterson is a Vedic meditation teacher with over a decade of experience in the addiction recovery field. He's also a co-founder of Nourish Mindful Events, which is a company that hosts retreats and pop-ups, providing space for people to nourish their mind, body, and soul. George is also the host of the Global Shift podcast, which is an incredible podcast. You need to check it out. He has amazing people on it and is currently finishing his first book that will offer basic steps for creating an enjoyable meditation practice and breaking free from whatever is holding you back. We talk about all this in the episode. We talk about the Vedic worldview, trauma, dismantling stress from the body, the power of meditation, how stress impacts us, why we should seek discomfort, how life is a perfect feedback loop. We just talk about some really, really incredible things, man, and just becoming the best version of yourself and becoming this 100-watt individual, what the process of recovery really means in our own language. So as always, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your love and support. If you want to get involved with the podcast, please send an email to fromthegravepodcast@gmail.com. Send in a voice memo, a topic you want to discuss, questions. We'll play the voicemail on the episode and respond to it. And we just love it. We thank you guys for your support. Peace.
What's the eternal principle?
But one.
Which is?
Well, we call it God, but that personifies it.
How long you been teaching meditation for? Well, we'll do this. How long have you been meditating, and then how long have you been teaching meditation?
So my meditation journey began back in 2011. So I got sober, actually really my meditation journey began in 2011 when I was getting sober this time. Like, I had tried meditating before, and I sort of had an experience that stuck with me, but I had no idea what I was really doing. And then, on and off, I would try to get sober. I struggled with drug and alcohol addiction for a long time. And then, during those periods of sobriety, like, I remember I started a 21-day meditation series that Deepak Chopra and Oprah were hosting. And it was the first time I feel like, even though I really had no idea what I was supposed to be doing, it was the first time, even for just like a split second, I started to feel a sense of inner happiness. And so my definition of happiness is contentment, meaning like I was content, not wishing anything else was happening. And that was the first time I'd ever experienced something like that without drugs and alcohol. And so this time when I got sober, like, I sort of remembered that feeling, even though it had been a while, because I think it stuck with me because I had never experienced that before without drugs and alcohol. And so this time when I got sober, I remembered that feeling. I started another one of those 21-day guided meditation series. And then in March of 2012, so less than a year after I got sober, I went to California and I learned how to meditate for the first time. And I knew right in the second day of learning to meditate that I needed to learn how to teach this. And so, eventually I became a Vedic meditation teacher, which, is a very long process if you're familiar with that. But I knew sort of right away after that second day of learning to meditate that I needed to learn how to share this practice with other people.
What was the transition like being a practitioner, right? Devoting yourself to the process and then stepping into this transition of all of a sudden, now I'm a teacher. Was there like a notable transition of it taking on a different form for you?
To be honest, not really that I can remember, because I mean, like, obviously, doing the Vedic meditation training to become a teacher was probably the most comprehensive step-by-step training to become a meditation teacher that I think you could do as a householder, other than if you wanted to become a monk or something. And so obviously a lot of changes took place in me from doing that training. And that's what I think prepared me to feel like I was capable of teaching once that training was over. But as soon as I learned to meditate, I started wanting to share this practice with other people. Like it was like, and I understand now, which I didn't understand back then, that it's sort of best to wait for worthy inquiry to be presented, before you just go telling people they need to learn to meditate. But, when I first got sober and when I first really became an active participant on the spiritual journey, like I didn't know everything that I know now. So right from the beginning, I felt like I was trying to share this thing, and scream it from the mountaintops, because the experience that I had had from learning to meditate, which for me I describe as being able to access my own inner reservoir of bliss, was something, again, as I already, had said, that, I felt like I had only experienced from drugs and alcohol. And now I was having that experience, and nothing outside of myself was required in order for me to have that experience.
Yeah, so it's kind of like getting sober for the first time and you realize you're going to be okay. You want to go, shout it from the rooftop and try to save everybody. And it's like, it's such a wet behind the ears thing to do. You know what I mean? But it's out of love. It's just, you realize like the most powerful way you could give that to someone is just by how you move, how you present yourself as a human being, and it's encouraging for me, like when you talk about this stuff and you mention bliss, right? I mean, this word kind of gets it's thrown around, as far as like from spiritual teachers and stuff like that. And one of my favorite spiritual guides, if you will, is Joseph Campbell, and he has this one line. He says, "Follow your bliss." He says, aside from everything, if you find what makes your heart leap, he goes, that right there, that's your bliss. If you just follow that, you'll be okay. So like when you mention stepping into bliss or this internal reservoir of bliss, can you expound on that a little bit? What does that mean?
Yeah. So, one of the ways I describe meditation to somebody, if they just quickly wanted to know the difference between Vedic meditation and some of the other meditation techniques that are out there and available, is I use the analogy of the ocean. And so, I talk about how, imagine that the waves on the surface of the ocean are like the 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day they say we have as a human being. I read a study once that said UCLA's Laboratory of Mental Imaging did a study that human beings have an average of 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day, which breaks down to a thought every 1.2 seconds. And so imagine that those thoughts are like the waves on the surface of the ocean. And so, do you know what a cross-section picture of the ocean is?
No.
It's a picture that looks at the top and bottom simultaneously. And so it's like if you took a knife and you sliced the ocean in half, and you could look at the whole side of the ocean from the very top to the bottom, you would see that even when there's all these crazy big waves on the surface, at the bottom, let's say where it's 500 feet deep, if you go down deep enough in the ocean, the bottom is still. It's calm, right? It's quiet. And so same with our minds. Underneath those 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day, there's calm, there's stillness, there's silence. And, one of the ways it's been described to me is the quiet zone, right? There's this quiet zone underneath all our mind's activity. Another way you could describe that is we all have our own inner reservoir of bliss inside. And so when I learned to meditate, I learned how to easily traverse from that busy surface focused thinking zone of my mind where all the waves were down to that quiet zone where that bliss was. And the cool thing about that is, I use this analogy when I teach Vedic meditation is I say, because Vedic meditation, for people who don't know, it's practiced 20 minutes twice a day, once in the morning, once in the later afternoon, early evening, ideally. And I tell people, instead of meditate twice a day for the next, we'll say 5 to 7 years, I want you to get as angry as you can, smash things, throw things, yell, scream, be mean to people, 20 minutes twice a day. And then I ask them, I say, what do you think would happen in 5 to 7 years if you went to the doctor for your annual routine checkup? And usually they say something like, at the very minimum, I'd have chronic high blood pressure. And that's because one day your body goes into the stress response so much that it just doesn't come out. That's what chronic high blood pressure is. So in meditation, instead of seeing how much stress we can get in our body and seeing how that changes things, what we're seeing is how much rest we can get in our body and seeing how that changes things. And so every day, if I keep accessing that quiet zone and that inner reservoir of bliss and coming back out of meditation into my eyes open state, I get to, just like the stress, if I went into stress every day, eventually I'd develop the body of stress. I come out of meditation one day and I have the body of bliss, meaning the bliss from our meditation starts to rise up to meet us in our eyes open state. And we start to have more of a background feeling of contentedness that carries with us throughout the day.
That is 1000% been my experience. This, bliss for me is just radically okay. Like having an okayness that I never thought was possible. And, and I like I said, I never thought that was there. I kind of just stumbled into it. My teacher, Matt Cardone, came onto my podcast. I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. We were in isolation at the time, and I'm just like, let me just give this a run, And I really don't know how and why I was able to stick with it. I've never really been like super spiritually disciplined. But what I tell people like is meditation has probably been one of the most profound thing in my life, like the most paramount aspect of change. And the change has been being okay, because my whole life, I don't know about my whole life, but when we look at addiction and alcoholism, I was not okay, like I was looking back, and now the knowledge and the things I've learned about stress and, when you get into heroin addiction and IV drug use or alcoholism, you're in a constant state of fight or flight. It's a constant threat of life. And then the thing that I think is going to save me from that threat actually perpetuates the problem and hurts me even more. So what I never realized is that all I ever wanted to do was be okay.
Mm.
And meditation hasn't always been like, it's a beautiful process, but it's also bringing up all this stress that's been stored in the body, and it moving around and finding its own process to leave isn't always a comfortable thing. Right. So talk to me about, and you started to get into it a little bit. Talk to me about why stress is such an enemy, how it affects us, and the detriments of that.
Yeah. And, before I go into stress and how it affects us, I want to touch on what you just said there about how specifically the practice of Vedic meditation helps to launder that stress out of our body, because what you just said is true. Some meditations are going to feel nice and deep and blissful and satisfying, and others are going to feel more rocky and turbulent. And it might feel like we're just staring at the back of our eyelids and we can't wait for the meditation to be over. Right. And those deep meditations, they do what I call the loosening. Right. And so when our mind starts deeply settling in those deep meditations, our body starts to receive a signal that things are really safe, probably safer than they've ever been in our entire life.
Mm.
And when our body receives that signal, our body actually starts to produce higher quality rest chemicals. Just like our body produces stress chemicals, it also produces rest chemicals. And those higher quality rest chemicals start to go down into our body cells and boot out our deepest stress, right? And so when that stress goes, though, it can't just magically disappear into the ether, right? It's got to go back out through the same filter of consciousness it originally entered into when we first got traumatized, the mind. And this is what creates those more rocky and turbulent meditations. And so when the stress leaves our body, though, it's not that we're going to forget how it made us feel. It's not that, we're even going to forget what happened to us. It's just, it's no longer going to have the same negative emotional charge anymore. And it's that stress. And you got to understand, when I say the word stress, and when we talk about stress, and you mention the effects of stress, stress is really a catch-all term, right? For anything that's keeping us blocked from our potential. And so that's really what the stress is doing, right? Our potential that we already want to grow into, right? There's a reason I keep feeling stuck in my life, right? There's a reason I can't see that life's going down for me, not to me, right? There's a reason that I keep taking things personally, right? There's a reason why, I overreact to things. And so when I have the accumulated calcified stress in my nervous system, it keeps us reacting. It keeps us seeing in the same old ways.
And so when we meditate and we're having these deep, profound sits, when like I'll be in a sit like that and I'll catch myself just smiling. You know what I mean? I'll come out of a sit and I'm just smiling, and I'm like, damn, that was nice. So you're saying that creates these little these chemicals that boot out all this stored stress in the body. But the process of that being relieved is that it has to leave through the same consciousness it was stored in. And that's not a pretty process, but it's necessary.
Well, I would word it the same filter of consciousness it originally entered into when we first got traumatized, which is the mind. And yeah, I mean, that's what creates the more rocky and turbulent meditations. But here's the deal. I just hosted a retreat a week long. We teach I know you're familiar with it, but it's an advanced technique in the Vedic tradition called rounding. And so rounding consists of some yoga asana, followed by a specific breathwork practice, followed by our 20-minute Vedic meditation practice, followed by, instead of normally in Vedic meditation, we take 2 minutes to sit after we're done meditating before integrating slowly back into activity. In rounding, you take 10 minutes to lie down in Shavasana instead of that 2 minutes at the end. And, we do these things called knowledge talks on our retreats. And on one of them, I was just telling all my students, like, look, some of our meditations, like I was just saying, are going to be nice, deep, blissful, and satisfying. Some are going to be more rocky and turbulent. Some are going to be a combination of both. We don't really care. What we care about is that meditation is emancipating us from our past, as evidenced by the fact that I can experience the same thing that 5 years ago used to trigger the hell out of me, and now I don't even react to it anymore.
And also, extension off of that is, the things that used to trigger me or whatever, but I move through my life now. And what I love about Vedic meditation is it's a passive process. I don't have to try to be mindful. If I'm showing up and I'm getting saturated in this bliss and this okayness, that's getting imprinted on my cells, and I'm carrying that out into my life, whether I want it to be that way or not. Like it allows me to see clearly in moments that I used to really, really get wound up in, you know, and have this remembrance of everything's okay. It's not a big deal. Like, you can go, I went through some really painful shit 2 years ago. And it was really unexpected, and it was easily the most painful thing I've ever been through in recovery. And I would say it was probably the most painful thing I've been through in my life of knowledge, because of how sober and aware I was at what was that, 2 years ago? I was 5 years sober, right? Yeah, so I think that makes sense. It was one of the most painful things I've been through in my life because of how aware I was. And it was one of the most holy experiences that ever happened to me, because in that process, man, I mean, it had me, I was gone. I was in rage. I had sent my first 911 text to my support, the homies, and I'm on the phone, all this stuff. But underneath the surface, man, I knew everything was okay. I knew I had that baseline okayness where, even though I was in this realm, in this drama of life, I was losing my shit. Underneath the surface, there was this baseline, this voice that goes, freak out, go ahead and freak out, but everything's okay. This is just a moment, And dude, that was one of the best things that's ever happened to me, because I never had that voice of okayness, I never had that heart telling me that everything's okay,
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. Before I comment on that, I do want to say congrats on your 7 years. I saw that you just celebrated.
Thanks, man. Appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, what you just described is sort of what I was saying about, the bliss from our meditation over time starting to rise up to meet us in our eyes open state. What that means, we're going to start to have a background feeling of contentedness. And that's what you just described, and what that means practically is like, we're going to be able to be in that situation that you really used to get us. And now we're going to still underneath it have that background feeling of contentedness, right? We're going to be around that person who really used to annoy us. And we're going to have that background feeling of contentedness, right? And really what it is we become less rigidly attached to things we can't control, like timing and outcome and other people. And it's not that we're going to be a doormat or let people walk all over us or something. We're just going to be, as you've heard me say before, more easily able to give 150%, but detached from the outcome.
Ever since you told me that a long time ago, probably 6 months ago, man, that is just, it's always been there, because when we talk about letting go, it's like, oh, what am I supposed to do? Just not try hard, just let go, just let nature take care of everything. It's like, no, you have a part to play. Like, you want to completely devote yourself to being involved with this life and being involved with nature. But don't get it twisted. Nature has the final say. You know what I mean?
100%.
So like that kind of has a little bit of like the philosophy of like the Vedic worldview. So Vedic meditation, like Vedic isn't just a name, like it comes from the Vedas, right? The ancient Vedas. Can you talk a little bit about like what the Vedas are and kind of like the root of the philosophy?
Yeah. So obviously
I know there's a lot. I know it's a
the
loaded question.
Vedas are much more complicated than the definition that I'm going to give you right now, but they're an ancient body of knowledge from India that gives us things like Vedic meditation, Ayurveda, yoga, and the Vedas are based on this like premises that everything is connected. And, one of the reasons we practice Vedic meditation is because when you access that inner reservoir of bliss inside, what you're really accessing is that experience of oneness, right? Which is what really is the basis of, the knowledge that is contained within the Vedas. The truth of the Veda, if you were to boil it down to a sentence, would be that there's only one thing and we're all it.
Why do we want to move through life knowing that we are all connected?
I was given a knowledge talk on our retreat about how to use our practice in more practical ways in the world with all the trauma there is and all the drama and struggle that everybody has to deal with. And I talk about when we meditate, you could, again, another word we could use to describe bliss is fulfillment.
Okay.
So when we meditate, some of that inner fulfillment starts to get imprinted in the background of our awareness. And over time, um, we might not notice it, but as we keep meditating twice a day, 20 minutes regularly, right, more and more of that internal fulfillment starts to get imprinted in the background of our awareness. And one of the side effects of that is that the voice of internal fulfillment inside of us starts to become more loud and clear. And if we're being triggered by somebody right now, that voice of internal fulfillment is the one that says, like, hey, you've done this to somebody before. Remember this, right? So you don't do it again. Compared to the other voice that says, like, screw that person. What an idiot. Like, can you believe what they did? Right. That's the pain body voice. That's the wounded voice. And the beauty of our practice, and first, before I keep going, I do want to say, like, everything that I'm saying here, I've learned from my teachers. And I always like to give them credit. I had somebody on a retreat. I don't want to get too sidetracked, but I do want to mention this, say to me, like, you give too much credit to your teachers, but I believe in giving credit where credit's due. So I just want to acknowledge that, like, I wouldn't have any of this knowledge if I hadn't done the Vedic meditation training and had the mentors that I've had.
Yeah.
And so back to what I was saying, though, is the beauty of our practice is it takes us beyond that pain body voice, the wounded voice, to the voice of internal fulfillment. And the beauty of turning up the volume on the voice of internal fulfillment is we start to see others as separate less. And the only reason I can hurt anybody, right, when I have more of that experience of the oneness, the only reason I can hurt anybody is because I see them as separate. And so when I have more of that experience of the oneness and I start to see others as separate less, then I'm going to hurt other people less.
Mm. And it also will remove, if I come in contact with someone, like, it would kind of remove fear, like sometimes we could, like you said, get triggered, and, we can just, get jammed up with other people. And I never really walked around considering this whole, like, we are one thing. If anything, in my ego years ago, before I started this, I'm like, that's so corny. You know what I mean? Like, I know it's true. Obviously, like, we're all made of the breath, from the breath of the same spirit. But to walk around with that and seated in your awareness is a completely different thing. To really sit in a room full of people or with your coworkers and know and feel we are all one. And whatever I do to you, I do to me. And whatever I say about you, I say about me. It's definitely a hard thing for me to practice, but I had never really been that guy walking around like that, like, oh, we are all one. Like, I didn't grow up with any of this shit. I don't know if you grew up with any type of, like, spiritual guidance in your life, but I didn't, you know what I mean? Like, but I love it. So, like, I just take it all in from all different areas. And, like, you're right, it is all recycled. And for me, it's just kind of like diving into all of it and then finding what sticks and moving with that. And one of the things that's been sticking with me of late is the structure of nature, I believe, which is creation, maintenance, and destruction. Like, life is season, right? Like, winter's always coming, and nature knows it's coming. Even the trees know, they store up their glucose, the leaves fall, and they're like, we're getting ready to go in, we're gearing up here. So can you talk about that? Because I know that comes from the Vedas, right? Creation, maintenance, and destruction. We're always in this process, what that looks like, what that means.
Yeah. Yeah. So, um, you know, I watched a video, one of my teachers put out, Emily Fletcher, who is the founder of Ziva Meditation. She used a quote in the beginning of it, which said, I'm pretty sure this was the quote word for word, but it's actually a Shakespeare quote, which says, like, nothing is either good or bad, but our thinking makes it so.
Mhm.
And, you know, in the Vedic worldview, there is no good or bad or right or wrong. There's only creation, maintenance, and destruction. And so, probably the simplest way for me to explain it would be that creation energy is when we're putting growth and evolution in the first position in our lives. And so, a good analogy to use in order to explain this creation, maintenance, and destruction principle is recovery, right? You see this all the time. People get sober because their life's a mess, right? I got sober a million times. I couldn't stay sober because, after a while, I felt so discontent. The only thing I knew that could provide me with with a little bit of temporary relief was to go use again. But, people get sober, and when they've hit a bottom, like, they become willing to go to any lengths, right? And they're ready to put growth and evolution creation in the first position in their life.
Yeah.
And so they do that for a while, and life really starts to get better, right? And they grow and evolve. And, part of putting, creation in the first position in our life is getting out of your comfort zone, right? And we're willing to do that. And, as we do that, we keep growing and evolving. And from the Vedic perspective, the only thing happening in the universe is evolution. And so things continue to grow and evolve in our life. And, a lot of times in recovery, when that takes place for a while and things start to get better in people's lives, they'll take their foot off the gas a little, and they'll start to get into maintenance, right? And they'll stop putting growth and evolution the first position in their life. And, when we stop putting growth and evolution the first position in our life, destruction comes nipping at our heels, because the only thing happening in the universe is growth and evolution, right? So when we stop growing and evolving, usually that's when what we call destruction happens. But really, what that is it's just a set of circumstances that helps us move back into putting growth and evolution first again.
Yeah.
And so, usually if you maintain too long, that's when, those sort of signposts that you need to change something up and start growing and evolving again start showing up. And in the Vedic tradition, there's a word for that, which is called the Rashi experience, which is like the clearing experience. And so, like, an analogy that, most people could understand is like when we stop growing and evolving, because, we can't, because the only thing that's happening is evolution. That's when events show up in our life that sort of force us to, start to grow and evolve again. And sometimes those events can feel like you getting that first bill in the mail, right? That your car payment is due. And then if you ignore that, right, the second bill comes. And if you ignore that, they send you the final bill. And if you ignore the final bill, they send the final bill. And if you ignore the final bill, that's when the repo man shows up and breaks your legs and takes the car back. And so that's sort of like what we would call destruction, is these events that sort of force us to start growing and evolving again.
Yeah. And so there's just as much love and destruction as there is in creation.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. I mean, and you talked about the effects of stress. Like, the reason we can't see that life's going down for us instead of to us is because of the accumulated calcified stress in our nervous system. But like you just said, like, those things that we call destruction, they're not really destruction. They're actually just helping us put growth and evolution back in the first position in our life.
So this kind of sounds, I've heard you say this before, I think on your TikTok, which I love your content, by the way. And for anyone, I mean, I haven't talked about this yet, but George has an awesome podcast called the Global Shift Podcast. And like your guests, dude, like I want to pull every one of your guests to have them on here. Like I mean, your podcast is just my alley all the way through. Just complete focus on spirituality, development, talking about the pain of that process, and just finding dope people doing dope spiritual shit in all areas of life. You know, there's heroes out there walking around. You seem to find them and have them on your podcast. So
Thanks.
just a lot of kudos your way for that. But anyways, kind of spinning off what you were saying, I've heard you say this, life is a perfect feedback loop. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah. I actually, one of my podcast guests, her name is Ali Bogard, who is one of my teachers, who's definitely been one of the biggest influences on my spiritual journey since getting sober, taught me. She said, life is a perfect feedback loop. And, when I think about life being a perfect feedback loop, what I think about is, I'm trying to think of the best way that I could explain it. Um, when you've heard me say it, like, what has your understanding based on what I've shared about it? What have you taken away from it?
Well, my experience with it is, so number one, I always hid from life. Okay. Hid, evade, run, just don't go out your door and face life. And then you realize if you want a different life, you got to start getting involved with it. Right.
Mhm.
So what I've learned in my experience, specifically the last 7 years when I became fucking conscious seemingly for the first time, is life is always screaming at you. God is always, maybe screaming is the wrong word, but it's always whispering. It's always telling you something. It's giving you feedback. It is a mirror to what's going on inside of you, or more specifically, your consciousness. So for me, it's been about listening, doing my best to listen. This is taking place. This is what's going on. What is life trying to teach me right now? And not even that everything needs to be a lesson, but I think that life's feedback is probably the number one thing I should listen to in my life. And the only way I can start to hear that feedback from life is to get involved with it by practices like Vedic meditation. So I guess, I mean, that was a really long-winded answer, but I guess what I'm trying to say is simply life wants you involved with it, and it's always speaking to you. It's your job to learn how to listen and respond accordingly.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. It reminds me of a couple things. First, I'm glad I asked you that because it gave me a sec to pull up that post, which said, give way more than you think is fair. Are you giving a gift to everyone you come into contact with? Are you helping and serving others? Are you cultivating a more expanded state of consciousness that will affect everyone you come into contact with? Are you cultivating an attitude of gratitude? Life is a perfect feedback loop. If you want to receive more out of life, start giving more, or start giving that which you seek, and it will keep the abundance of the universe circulating in your life. And so, that's really, for me, part of what life being a perfect feedback loop means. It means give way more than you think is fair. If you want success, give success, right? If you want a financial abundance, learn to give that. I think one of the things we have backwards is we think, once I'm abundant, then I'll be generous. Doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
The universal principle is, whatever we give, we have. And so, if you're not going to give $10 of your last $100, then you're probably not going to give $10,000 when you have $100,000. And what you made me think about with your share is, I had this Vedic meditation teacher, Jeff Kober, on my podcast, who talked about how spirit, life, the universe, whatever you want to call it, is continually giving us the opportunity to choose more life. And, what that reminds me of is, I can look back and see, even when I was using, for instance, how, there was something there that was trying to guide me. And, I have had people who were using whose parents have reached out to me to try to help them get sober, and they didn't want the help. And within a few days of their parents reaching out to me and them saying no, their phone butt dialed me. And it's like, even in this moment where they were really struggling, their phone called me without their permission, somebody who could have helped them, right? And positioned them to at least have a better opportunity or chance to try to get sober. I had a situation which I shared on that podcast where um a I was driving and somebody got really close to like rear-ending me. So got to a stop sign and I pulled over, and I just was going to let them pass me, and they pulled over behind me. And when they pulled over behind me, I got out of the car because they kept flicking their lights at me. I thought maybe it was because, there was something wrong with my car. They needed to let me know. And at that moment, the guy sort of pulled out on the side of me and looked at me. And at that moment, I realized what he was doing. He had road rage because I wasn't driving fast enough in front of him. And so he decided he was going to hit the gas and the brakes at the same time and spin his tires and speed out of there. And he lost control of his car and he smashed the tree at like 40 miles an hour on the other end of the road. And then I got nervous that he was going to get out and I didn't know if he had a gun or something. So I started backing up the road, and he backed up off the tree. I don't even know how, because the whole entire front of his truck was dented in. And then he ended up deciding that he was going to hit the gas and the brakes at the same time again and screech off again to make a point. And he lost control of the car again. You can't make this shit up, bro. And he hit the fire hydrant on the other side of the road. And no, but then he gets out of the car and I decide to pull over. My intuition just says pull over. And I roll down the window. I'm like 40 feet away from the guy. And I yell, "Is everything okay?" And he says, "Yeah, I'm so sorry." And in that moment, I knew he was drinking, because nobody goes from being that upset to that sorry or that emotional so quickly unless they're under the influence of alcohol. And the guy was like an 80-year-old guy. Wow. And so he walks all the way across the street, reaches his hand in my passenger seat window and says, "I'm so sorry." And I said, "Are you okay?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Can I ask you a question?" He said, "Yeah." And I said, "Have you been drinking?" He said, "Yeah, I'm wasted right now." He said, "Can you help me?" Meaning, like, could I help him get his car out of there? And I said, "Well, I don't think you should be driving." And I went over there and I sort of helped him get the sticks, because he had driven into a tree with all these branches. So they were all in the front of his car now, out of the front of his car. And he goes, "All right, I'm going home. My house is 2 houses up on the left." And I said, "Before you go, here's my number. I want anything you need. Like, I've been sober 10 years. I'll do whatever I can to help you." He said, "No, I'm all set." He got in his car and he drove off and he went to his house. But the point of that story is, like, what are the chances that this guy hits the tree, then the fire hydrant in front of the kid who's been sober 10 years, doesn't even call the cops on him, and only wants to help him get sober? So even though he didn't take advantage of that opportunity, life, even in those moments of struggle, is still trying to, or spirit is still trying to afford us the opportunity to choose more life.
Yeah, that's powerful, man. Was this like, I know you're up north. Was this in the snow, or was this like, because it's more embarrassing if this is like summertime?
No, this was not in the snow. It was in summertime.
Oh
It was bad, dude. I thought he died.
really?
I've never seen anything like this. I mean, the car, when he hit the gas and brakes, I don't know if he jerked the wheel. The truck went up on 2 wheels, and luckily he didn't hit the house. If the tree wasn't there, he would have went right through somebody's house. He smashed the tree in front of the house that was across the street. And the craziest thing is, nobody saw this whole entire sequence of events take place. So the cops never got called. Nobody ever found out about it. Those people weren't home. And it was just, it was like in that moment, the universe was giving him the opportunity to get sober. He didn't
And
want to take the help.
that was probably the final bill before the final bill.
Yeah, but here's the thing that Jeff Kober said to me on my podcast when I told him that story. He said, yeah, but the story's not over. He said, that guy might have went home and woke up, might have pissed his pants, woke up, and then been like, what the fuck did I do when he looked at his truck? And he might have gone to his first meeting after that.
Yeah.
Because the other thing that I talk about a lot with my students is, they've done a study where they took 1% of a population of an inner city and brought them into the area and had them meditate together using this technique. And the crime rate dropped 10% every single time. And that's only with 1% of the population. And so our state of consciousness affects everybody we come into contact with. And so we never know. Our job as a meditator is just to meditate every day, twice a day, and then take our meditation state of consciousness on the move with us. Because we never know how that's going to affect the people we come into contact with, right? We could, get that nudge from our inner guidance to go left instead of right. And we might feel like, oh, that way home took a lot longer. What was the point of that? But what you didn't see was that your inner guidance was guiding you to go that direction because you were passing somebody's house who decided that they didn't want to stick around on this earth anymore. And you just driving by them, bringing your meditation state of consciousness on the move, caused them to pick up the phone and call someone and stick around one more day.
Right. We don't have to know why. Like wanting an answer for why these things are happening. I was just talking about this last week on the podcast, is like, whenever I want an answer for why things are happening, it just creates suffering. Because I want an explanation for what nature is doing. It's like life. You sit down, let me know what you're doing. It's like, yeah, that's cute, buddy. Like I don't need to.
100%. And you may never know the reason. Right. And you're not gonna for a lot of the things. Right. And, like they would say, and there's an advanced course that we teach in the Vedic tradition called Exploring the Vedas. And in there, Tom Knowles, who's my teacher's teacher, who's sort of like the, master of Vedic meditation, he says, why do these things happen? Like, what is the reason? For all reasons.
What is the reason for all reasons?
Yeah, like the reason anything happens is for all reasons.
Oh, yeah. So switch. I mean, just to build off of what you were talking about there with, so you've been sober 10 years.
11
years.
12.
That's some time. How old are you?
34.
34. And you were a heroin guy.
Yep. Started using heroin at 15.
Wasted no time, huh? Got right into it.
Got right into it. When I was 15, I'll share the story real quick if you want.
Sure. Yeah. Sure.
I was looking for an outside fix for an inside job.
Sure.
And one of the avenues I did that through was women. And I was obsessed with this girl.
Uh-huh.
Prettiest girl in my high school by far.
Oh, yeah.
And I was in 10th grade. She was a senior. And I found out, we were in class together. We had mutual friends. I had a party that year. She had came. I was pretty good at skateboarding growing up and still pretty decent. And so I was friends with all the older kids. And so we had mutual friends, and I was talking to her in chemistry class. She mentioned she wanted to go to this Britney Spears concert. My sister had tickets, couldn't go. My mom offered me the tickets. I'm like, I'll be taking those. I asked her if she would go. She had a boyfriend. I did not care. I wanted to do anything I could to be close to this girl. And she said yes. And a few days before that concert, I can see it as clear as day. We're in the high school cafeteria, and she asked me if I'd ever try heroin for the first time. And for me, I was like, I had heard all the shit about heroin. right?
Yeah.
But and how bad it was. But I looked at this girl, the hottest girl I'd ever seen in my entire life, and was like, if this girl does heroin, it cannot be bad.
Yep. Sign me up.
And so, crazy story. We went to the Britney Spears concert. Her boyfriend actually drove us. Her boyfriend and his best friend picked us up from the concert. They had just gone down to Mass. And if you're familiar with New England, there's, heroin is huge down in some areas in Massachusetts. And they picked up some heroin, and I got in the car with her after the concert, and they had some lines broken out on a CD case, and they passed it around, and it got to me. And the kid in the passenger seat, I'd never met him before. He wasn't there when they dropped me off, but her boyfriend had gone, picked this kid up, and they'd gone and picked up. And you got to mind you, I'm 15.
Yeah.
This kid in the passenger seat, he's over 20. He's like 22. Her boyfriend's probably like 19.
Yeah. He's turning high school kids out. He's catching licks in 7th period.
Yeah, and I look like a little fucking kid.
Yeah.
And I honestly like joke about this because my name is George, but my middle name is Spike. And I never was known as George growing up. So everybody called me Spike. And I always joke around that the only reason these people even took me serious because my name was Spike. Like I was like a little fucking kid.
Yeah.
But
That name's cool as shit.
Yeah, looking back on it, I'm like, dude, if I was them and I saw me in the back seat of my car, I would not be passing heroin around. I'd be scared that little kid in the back seat was going to tell on me or something.
Right.
And so it got to me, and the kid in the passenger seat said, I'm not sure if you want to do that. I don't know if you know what you're getting yourself into. And I was like, listen, I got this, because I wanted to do anything that this girl was doing.
Yeah.
And so I sniffed that line, and I kept doing heroin with them for the next few months. And one day I couldn't get it because I didn't have money or it wasn't around or something. And I got dope sick. And then, I always said I would never use needles. And one day I ended up getting some heroin that was wet and I couldn't sniff it. And my buddy was like, well, if you want to get high, you got to shoot it. And that person who had told me that I had to shoot it was the same person in the passenger seat of that car that day.
Oh, wow.
And so fast forward, that person's been sober 14 years now. I've been sober 11. They're my sponsor in recovery and my best friend. And when I got sober this time, they were sober 3 years, and they were there. They were the first person when I drank for the last time who I called and said, I'm ready to do it somebody else's way.
Damn, that's crazy. How was the Britney Spears concert?
I don't remember much. I don't even remember Britney Spears. I remembered because I've always been into hip hop. Like I got the WuTang Clan 36 Chambers of Death album when I was like 10.
Yeah.
And I've never looked back, and that's the primary genre of music I listen to. But I do remember that Kelis, Kelis.
Yeah.
Open for her, and that's all I remember.
So I probably would have done the dope just to forget that I was at a Britney Spears concert. Did you get the girl? What, this was like a romantic story. You didn't get the girl. She just
and the truth is, I actually used to lie and say that I did.
Hey,
but I lied about everything.
You took a Britney Spears concert, blow to the chest. So, you gotta cover that up with something.
Yeah. But I lied about everything. As a matter of fact, talking about hip hop, I used to I'm really into, I've always been into underground and just classic hip hop. And I definitely listened to a lot of artists that people hadn't heard of. And when I was living in sober houses before I was on the path I'm on now, and doing the inner work like I am today, I used to show people these artists that nobody knew. I'd be like, oh yeah, that's my cousin.
You asshole. That's so funny, dude. Yeah. Just posturing, trying to get any type of attention or credit we can get. 100%.
I was just so scared of what everybody thought about me.
Sure. And that creates so much suffering. I'm just like constantly trying to just hold this frame of this painting up in front of you. Just please believe this. Please just look at this rather than me. Please just, I'm going to paint this in. Oh, this dude's my cousin. I got this girl. I did this. I was a tough guy here. They just please, God, just listen to this, you know? Man, there's so much suffering in that, man. I did that too. I was so scared just to be, you know, who I was. I still think about like, you know, I got into a lot of like intensive like trauma therapy and stuff like that and inner child work. I don't know if you've done stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I never wanted to be the kid that I was. I just thought I was inherently wrong. You know, I felt like this is very cliche to say, but I felt like everyone else had the cheat code to life, and I didn't even have a fucking controller. You know what I mean? Like I'm just like, these dudes are playing the game. They got the cheat code. They got the whole book, how to unlock characters, skip levels, and I don't even got a fucking controller, man. And I don't know what's going on, you know? And heroin took that all away. You know, it just made everything okay immediately. And then when you get sober, and like you said, like I'm finally willing to do it somebody else's way, that's when you have to start contending with all these things, all these blocks that you built up, all these formidable walls that I wasn't even really aware that I had, you know? So like in your own words, you speak a lot about recovery, including into your Vedic meditation teaching practice and all that stuff, which I think is awesome. I think we need more of that. What is like the essence? What is recovery all about in your own language? Now, you really have your own language with this stuff, and I would love for you to talk about it, because I think that people that have truly recovered and have resurrected from this whole thing, it's so important to be able to talk about recovery and life in your own language for people.
Yeah. First of all, you know, in a lot of recovery groups, spiritual recovery groups, you know, addiction is viewed as a disease. And I actually believe at its core, it's a response to trauma. And an analogy that I love to use is this analogy of a light bulb, right? So we have a light bulb, and let's say it has 100-watt potential. And over time, as the light bulb continues to sit there, the dust begins to build up on it, right? And the 100-watt potential of that light bulb, if the dust continues to build and build and we don't come around and dust it at all, is going to go down to maybe 60 or 50 watts. And for me, the trauma and again, stress for me is really a catch-all term for anything that's blocking us from our potential, right? So that's trauma, that's pain, that's shame, that's those core wounds I have inside, right? And those are the reason that I used, right? And so that stress is like the dust that starts to cover up the 100-watt potential of the light bulb. And if I come around and I dust off that light bulb, right, then that 50-watt potential that the light bulb might have gone down to goes back up to 100 watts. So when I showed up to recovery, I had all this trauma, right? I had all this, again, pain, shame, all these core wounds. And all of those things are what was blocking me from my potential, right? And all of those things were the pain or were what was causing the pain inside that made me want to use. And so when I got sober this time and I learned how to meditate, it was like the meditation was like the duster, right? And another practice that really has played an important part in my recovery that works like meditation to get rid of the dust that's been covering up the potential of the light bulb is breath work. And so, you know, both of these practices were like the duster that came along and started to dust off that light bulb and bring my potential back up to 100 watts. And when I say potential, I mean my physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual potential. And, in some spiritual recovery groups, they talk about how our thinking over time will start to be placed upon a plane of inspiration. And there's a lot of talk in, different spiritual recovery groups about the need for a higher power, right? And for me, I call that higher power my inner guidance or my inner GPS, right? You could call it the voice of God or, nature's intelligence, but we all have, or the voice of your heart, but we all have this intuition, right, inside. And, my understanding of recovery, some people, like I said, might explain it as like developing a relationship with your higher power, or, maybe somebody might call it moving from your most individual self, your ego, to your most universal self, your soul or spirit. But in doing so, that voice of inspiration inside starts to become more loud and clear. And my understanding of recovery now, and really life now, is going from a state of object referral, where I was primarily sourcing what was right for me externally from the world around me, and object referral, where my happiness was dependent upon people, places, and circumstances, to self referral, where I primarily source what's right for me from my own intuition, from that voice of God inside, and a state of self referral where I have an internal state of happiness that is independent of external circumstances.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. And I always thought that, you know, I wanted recovery. I think a common mistake is like we think recovery should look a certain way, and having any like pre-designed thing of how it needs to look, I think really just shades the color in a negative way. It's like I never wanted to just accept what was in front of me, which was discomfort. And like dusting isn't fun. Like it sounds like like, oh, dust off the light bulb, it's like it ain't easy, but like it's worth it every night and every day, because I never thought I could ever be okay without those types of substances, the poison that I was putting in me, And after really getting into recovery and moving past like very common 12-step recovery material, I do also believe that it is it's all trauma. It's really sourced in just, pain. I mean, call it whatever you want, but the why isn't as important as like, what are you going to do about it? Like people have been victimized. People have gone through some very unjust things. That doesn't relieve you from the responsibility of healing it and dusting. It's like if we just want to stay back and be victimized and stand there, it's like, have fun at 40 watts, have fun at 40 watts then, and it's not like, and we're like, it's not absolving the injustice that's happened. Like, it's not saying that was okay, but it is saying, hey, you have dust all over the light bulb. And if you want to continue moving through life at 40 watts, like that's your prerogative. But what could happen if we got to 100 watts? And I think that's the beautiful state that you mentioned about just being conscious or moving through life with a different level of consciousness and passing by somebody, as you get to be that. And I say this with humility, but 100-watt person walking around. And that is naturally, to even unveil the metaphor even more, you're naturally going to shed light on other people, and it's going to have an affect. Like you almost can't be hidden. You in a very real sense don't even have to go out and try to serve. Like it just will come to you as it's supposed to, or come to others as it's supposed to. You meet someone, you're like, all right, I know I'm going to be working with this guy. Like our paths have crossed for a reason. Emmett Fox has this one line, and he says, you'll know that you're really on the path, or if you devote your life to as much service to others as possible without interfering or fussing. And that's the catch. Like, you don't go out, scream it from the rooftops, interfere, fuss, try and da da da. He's like, just be there, be open for service, but don't get in there and fuss around and try to bend and wrestle and save the world. Just go be you. Go get saturated in that 100 watt, take care of the dust on the light bulb, and then just bring that person out into the world. And whatever's supposed to come is supposed to come.
Yeah, I mean, you just nailed it. I mean, sometimes the way that, we can best serve others is just to be our most authentic self. And, my teacher's teacher would say, we're the vehicle for fulfillment, and it doesn't mean that we're special or anything. We're just doing our job, and as you continue to access higher states of consciousness, your state of consciousness is going to affect everybody you come into contact with. Like another story I like to, tell to explain that is, you're, like you said, like, don't get in the way of it. Like, your heart might say to you, like, hey, go to the store and buy a pair of shoes. Right. And the intellect might try to get in the way and say to you, like, you don't even need shoes. Right. But the reason that we're being asked to go get those shoes, especially if that message is coming from our heart, probably doesn't have anything to do with us needing a pair of shoes from the shoe store. Right. It might be because on the way there, we're going to pass somebody who said, hey, if I don't see the yellow car that you happen to be driving today, then, I'm just going to go back to being mean to people, because the only person who ever loved me was somebody who had that same yellow car. So in order to know that, life, I should be caring and kind in life, I want to see that yellow car today. And that might be why you were being asked to go to the shoe store. And so then you get there and they might not even have those shoes that you want. Right. But the reason you were being asked to go to the shoe store didn't have really anything to do with you needing anything from the shoe store. It's same with, like, if our heart tells us to go, pop our head inside the ice cream shop, right? It probably doesn't have anything to do with us necessarily needing ice cream. It might have to do with, us being the vehicle for fulfillment.
Vehicle for fulfillment, man. I love that. So before we close, I know you have a wellness and retreat company, right? Nourish Mindful Events. Why don't you talk a little bit about that, man?
Yeah. So, after, I started my journey and became a meditation teacher, I really realized that, the most important thing I can do on a daily basis is prioritize my own inner work. One of my teachers, Light Watkins, who you're having on the podcast next month, who really has taught me pretty much almost everything I've shared on the podcast today. He said it when I had him on my podcast. He said, if we prioritize our inner work every day, we'll never have to worry about our needs not being met. And for me, I just realized, if I prioritize my inner work and put it in front of everything else, then I'm not going to have to worry about any of the other stuff. Right. It's sort of like in recovery, like they say, like, put your sobriety first and everything else will work out. For me, my sobriety is the inner work. And, I realized really it's called nourish, because what that means is if I don't take time to nourish myself and do the inner work, then I can't show up as the best version of myself for everyone else. Like you said, I can't show up as the version of myself that's at the 100-watt potential, right? I can't be the vehicle for fulfillment, right? Because in order to be the vehicle for fulfillment, I first have to cultivate my own internal state of fulfillment. And so my wife is an amazing chef, and, I went plant-based, which is another, I see people all the time in recovery who, don't understand the value of, everything we take in through our five senses, which includes the sense of taste, either as a negative or positive effect on our body and our mind. And, the analogy we use is, if you had a Lamborghini, would you put 87 or would you put premium in it? And this body's the vehicle through which you move through life. And so you have to put premium in it. And so, my wife became a plant-based chef because we realized the value of putting premium in our bodies and doing things like fasting and detox. And I just realized that when you combine practices like Vedic meditation, which is what I teach, eating healthy, which is what she teaches people how to do, and we have we call it a collective. Our Nourish collective consists of me, her, and my best friend in recovery, Jillian Hanna, who's a breathwork healer. Because like what I've discovered is, if I'm doing breath work and I'm doing my Vedic meditation practice twice a day and I'm eating right, like those are three of the best ways I can maximize my physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual potential. And so we created this company where we host these destination retreats. And one of the practices that we do a lot of on those retreats is rounding. And so I talked a little bit about rounding, but we all have surface level stressors, mid-level stressors, and deep level stressors. And if you're just meditating with Vedic meditation, 20 minutes twice a day, it might take you 1, 2, 3 years to get rid of those surface level stressors. If you're meditating twice a day, every day, it might take you 3, 4, 5 years to get rid of those mid-level stressors. And to get rid of the deep level stressors, it might take 5, 6, 7, 8 years of twice daily meditation. But rounding is what we call an industrial strength stress release. And so on a week-long rounding retreat, your body can start to release some of those deeper level stressors that might not have been set to come out for 5, 6, 7, 8 years in just a week of rounding. Because like even on our last retreat, we just got back from hosting in Zion National Park in Utah. Some people got up to 9 rounds in a day. So you're essentially doing rounding for 9 hours a day. That's going to boot out some of those deep level stressors. And again, it's not that we're going to forget how these things made us feel. And it's not that we're going to forget what happened to us. It's just that, we can experience, once we get rid of those, that same thing that used to trigger the hell out of us 5 years ago. And now we don't react to it anymore. And so on our retreats with our company, we teach people these practices to maximize their potential. And so they can operate from the 100-watt potential. And, it's been amazing to be able to host these retreats. The best part about the retreats that we host is, we start with a welcome circle, but then we do the closing circle. And that's the most powerful part of the whole retreat because, people share their experience at the end of it. And people say, I cried for the first time in 30 years. And it's like to see like real transformation taking place in people. It's like they say in recovery, there's nothing better than watching the light turn on in somebody else's eyes. And, for me, and these aren't recovery retreats, they're an alcohol-free experience, but people who aren't in recovery do come to them all the time. But a lot of people in recovery come too. And, for me, when I first got sober, did the 12 steps, and there's something called, I'm sure, which you're familiar with, the 4-step. And I wrote like 5 notebooks worth of my resentments and my fears and my sex inventory. And, what nobody told me though, is that stuff was still going to be stored inside my body's cellular memory and dictating how I was reacting in the moment of my life. But now that I've done this inner work, which we teach on our retreats, that stress from my past, that trauma no longer is dictating how I'm showing up in the moment of my life anymore.
That's beautiful, man. Yeah, that's beautiful. And when I started and did the 4-step and the notebooks and all that, yeah, it's scratching the surface, it's scratching the surface of seeing that stress and how it has damaged your life. But the longer I stay sober, the more intimate experiences I have with these traumas and these stresses. And I start to like really see them. And practice what David Hawkins talks about is letting go, letting them come up, letting them be felt in the body, not resist them, let the feelings be there, and pay no attention to the thoughts surrounding them. And that's some powerful stuff. And rounding, as you said, has been profound for me. And that unlocks a lot of stuff too. So, I mean, it's just beautiful, man. Like you talk about the breath work, that's been coming to my doorstep a lot lately. And I signed up for a course. Actually, I'm on a waiting list for one. I haven't gone and done that. I hear a lot about like the Wim Hof thing and stuff you can do on your own, but that's something I haven't opened to the door to yet. But I always hear amazing feedback on breath work.
Well, the other thing too, I just want to say about breath work is the breath work I'm talking about is a very specific style of breath work, because there's a lot of things out there called breath work. And this is a specific style of breath work. And the main teacher, sort of like the Tom Knowles of Vedic meditation, is this guy. I've had him on my podcast. You should definitely check him out. And he would be great to have on your podcast.
Okay.
He talks so well about trauma, and he knows a lot about recovery and sexual abuse trauma, which a lot of people in recovery have dealt with. And his name is David Elliott, and he teaches a very specific style of breath work. And it's very simple, actually. It's literally you breathe into your belly through your mouth. It's all through the mouth. Fill up your belly into the chest, exhale out of the mouth. And you're doing that for 30 minutes straight while you lie down. And the way that Jillian, the breathwork healer who teaches on our retreats, talks about it is like a power washer. It literally goes in and power washes the stress out of your body. Like you will cry during breath work. Like trauma is, and that's the thing, like you're describing, like that process of releasing trauma, of releasing stress from our body, right? It's not a pretty process because it goes back out, like I keep saying, the same filter of consciousness it originally entered into when we first got traumatized, the mind, which means we have to re-experience these things again as they're leaving our body, which means if we cried in the past, we're going to cry. It means we've been angry in the past, we're going to get angry, which means if we've experienced sexual abuse trauma on some level, we're probably going to re-experience that stuff again, right? The way I describe it in my meditation training is if it's a dark cranny from the past, if it's some stress from your past, meditation's going to find a way to go in and pull it up and out. And when it goes, you're going to have to re-experience it to some degree again.
Trust the process.
Yeah.
Well, man, I mean, I could continue talking about this for hours, but I'm grateful that we got to do this. I know we tried in the past, but we were having a little bit of like technical difficulties. And I'm grateful for you, man. You taught me a lot. I'm glad you're in my life. We stay in contact, and you're a guide. You're a guide to me, and I'm really glad we stumbled into each other, and I reached out to you on Instagram and all that. And I'm just a huge fan of what you're doing, man. I think you're helping a lot of people.
Yeah, thank you so much. I feel the same about you. I'm grateful that you followed your heart and reached out to me on Instagram, and that we've connected. And I love the work you're doing. And I've listened to some of your previous podcast episodes and think that your message is great. And everybody who I share your podcast with loves the name From the Grave. You're doing a great job. Your gear, your merchandise is fire, everything you're doing. And it's like you said, even the founders of those 12-step groups, they said that those programs were just spiritual kindergarten. And I think that the knowledge that you're bringing on your podcast is, helping people once they graduate from kindergarten, learn this, what I consider like next level knowledge. And when you combine this stuff with that information in recovery, it can take your life to the next level. And I just did want to mention one thing real quick, which is that if anybody is interested in learning more, I am writing a book that's coming out at the end of the year. And it's going to teach you how to use meditation, or 4 steps to use meditation to overcome whatever's holding you back. So it might be something that's worth checking out. So I'll send it along.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's awesome. That's incredible. Do you have a name yet?
I had a name, but I'm changing it. So I know
Okay.
that the subtitle is probably going to be something like 4 steps to use meditation to overcome what's holding you back, but I'll update you and, would love for you to share it when it comes out.
I would be honored. I'd be honored. Maybe we can have you back on at the end of the year, at least, if not before that, talk about the book.
Nice. Thank you so much.
But anyways, man, blessings up there. And I love you. I appreciate you, man.
Love you too, bro. Thanks so much for your time.
All right, homie, later.
Later.